Hello everyone, and welcome to the Age Group Triathlon podcast. My name is Simon Olney, I'm a professional triathlon coach, and in this week's episode I'm going to be looking at the best bike upgrades for triathlon. Now, this really is, what they call sort of a red meat subject, isn't it? This is something that a lot of you are going to be very excited to hear and to learn about. And I'm excited to share it with you. I worked in a bike shop for several years, I help people with this kind of thing. But the big caveat that I want to really push home is at the end of the day, it's all about your legs. It's all about your fitness. These bike upgrades, they are lovely to have. Some of them are going to be really actually quite impactful on your bike split, on your ability to complete your race, on your comfort. There are lots of reasons why we want to invest in these. However, let's not kid ourselves. If most of us went out and rode hard on a time trial bike, we would still get beaten by a professional athlete on a hybrid bike or a shopping bike, It is all about your fitness. The amount of times that on my first bike, my £500 Specialized Alley Compact, my very first road bike, and I would go steaming past people who were on full time trial rigs that were worth probably more than my car was at the time. Actually, far more than my car was at the time. What am I talking about? Then it would be, it's just ridiculous. So don't be that person, who splurges a load of money on their bike when your fitness is still, developing, shall we say. You want to wait until you've got your feet under the table in the sport, you've got a bit more experience before you start getting the credit card out. It's not up to me to tell you how to spend your money, but it's not going to make you feel great if you drop over 10 grand on the perfect bike setup and you find yourself getting overtaken by people left, right and centre. It's not going to endear you to stay in the sport, and a lot of people who experience this will then go and sell the bike off at a huge loss. So pace yourself with these upgrades. Don't rush in unless money is no object to you. Again, it is completely up to you, but I recommend just pace yourself and focus on, if you have money to spend, focus on spending in other areas before you start throwing at every item on this list. Now, before we get started, I wanted to cover the idea of a road bike versus a triathlon bike. Upgrading from a road bike to a triathlon bike is probably the biggest upgrade that a triathlete can make. It's going to have a real impact on your performance on race day. However, I have covered this subject in depth already in a previous episode. So if you're on the fence about whether to get a triathlon bike or not, have a look at episode 31, Do You Need a Triathlon Bike?, which will talk you through all the considerations that you need to make, some rough approximations of time you could save, and all the benefits of getting yourself a dedicated triathlon bike. And this episode as well is going to work on the assumption that you're currently riding a road bike. If you are riding a hybrid bike, if you're riding something with flatter handlebars, wider knobbly tyres, focus on getting a road bike first. That should be your number one priority, okay? The difference is going to be night and day. Having those skinnier tyres, having that lighter frame, that better rolling resistance, being more aerodynamic, it's going to make an enormous difference. So these are all road bike upgrades that I'm going to be covering here today. Now let's get stuck in. Let's talk about tyres. Now, I've talked about tyres on this podcast a good few times already, and I'll continue banging this drum. Tyres are one of the most impactful upgrades you can make to your bike. It is ridiculous how much of a difference they make, and they primarily make a difference in three areas. The first one, which is going to be of interest to most of you, is puncture resistance. Now, when you buy a bike, they want to keep the price on the overall package down. Okay, if somebody is looking at two bikes and one is £500 and one is £700, most people are going to go for the £500 one. And the £700 bike may have really good tyres on it. It may have some nicer upgrades, but people, they want to save money, especially when they're getting into the sport. And I can't blame them. So we want to be looking at the tyres that we can upgrade on our bike, because the puncture protection that they are going to offer will be vastly superior to the tyres that came on your bike. Now, if you paid sort of two and a half grand or more for your bike, there's a good chance that there are some decent tyres on there already. Have a look at the tyres. Google the tyre, the sort of the information will be on the sidewall of the tyre. Give it a Google, learn about that tyre. Look at the reviews, see what people are saying. It may be that it's actually quite a high performance tyre that they bundled in at that price point. But most people, when they get their first road bike, is going to have really awful tyres on it, which are just going to increase the risk of punctures. Now, most tyres have some kind of puncture protection in this day and age. The tyres that I rode around on when I was younger, that were just rubber, I think the days of those have gone, as far as I'm aware. There is always some level of sort of puncture protection bead in there. How effective this puncture protection is really depends on the price point. And it is a difficult one because it's very easy to make a tyre that will never puncture because you could just stick a slather of metal in there. But that is going to make the bike feel absolutely horrendous to ride. It's going to affect the way it rolls. It is going to be a horrible idea. So all these tyre manufacturers are investing in different kinds of technology that allow them to have the maximum puncture protection with the minimum effect on their tyres themselves. If you spend more for a tyre, you will get better puncture protection and it will affect the ride less. It really is a win-win. Now, if you were to look at some tyres such as Continental Gator Skins or the Specialized Roubaix, these are tyres which are designed for, winter riding, poor conditions, urban riding. In the case of the gator skin, really, where you're much more likely to come across sort of broken glass and screws and stuff like that on the road. And the gator skin is just designed to be the most puncture resistant tyre that you can get. And it does the job very well. I know people have ridden them for years and never got a single puncture. Well, why wouldn't everybody ride these gator skin tyres? Well, two reasons. They're heavy, they don't roll well, we get onto that later, and they have low levels of grip, especially in the rain. In fact, some people call them skater skins, because this is all down to a compromise. You cannot have the world's lightest tyre that rolls incredibly well and the world's best puncture protection and the lightest tyre all in the same tyre. That's just a unicorn. It doesn't exist. There are compromises in every walk of life, especially in technology. And the tyre market is, it's renowned for it. Now, I'm not going to tell people not to ride gator skins. I'd never dream of telling people that. If you are somebody who maybe sort of lacks the strength in their hands to be able to change a puncture when they're out and about, you may say to yourself, look, I'm just not taking my chances. I'd rather get round my event a bit slower, but know that I'm not going to have a puncture than spend the entire bike ride petrified that I'm going to pick up a flat. Fair enough. You do you, that's fine. However, most people who are racing, most people who are competitive, who have sort of targets that they want to achieve, they are going to want to go for a slightly lower level of puncture protection on sticking with the Continental range of something like the GP 5000s, which is still a very high level of puncture protection, but with much improved grip, much improved rolling resistance. And there's a reason the GP 5000 is notably more expensive than the Gator Skin. The second benefit that I touched on there is grip. Now, if you are looking for a high quality rubber, that is going to come at a price. But the higher quality of the rubber, again, sort of depending on how it is that the rubber is manufactured, but broadly speaking, with tyres, the more expensive the tyre, the better the grip in the corners. You will be able to go around corners with much more confidence. Now, if you are somebody who is just sort of pootling around corners very slowly, it's not going to make an enormous difference. However, if you are somebody if you're riding in conditions that are less than perfect, if you're going downhill, if you are the kind of person who sort of pushes things a little bit in the corners, then going for these tyres that have improved grip can be the difference between staying upright or washing out. And I've had it before on cheap tyres where I've been riding along, when I lived in London, and I rode over a drain cover and I just ended up, boom, on the floor. No idea what happened. When I started riding with more sort of higher end tyres with better grip, that never happened again. So, of course, there are, you can never isolate these things out. Oh, yes, it was absolutely the tyres and that, it could have been that I just did something stupid without realising when I was new to riding. but the improved grip on these tyres, it's just a win-win. Nobody benefits from having low grip in a tyre. So even if you're not somebody who's going to be pushing the absolute limit in the corners, getting tyres with higher grip is never a bad idea. And finally, we have rolling resistance. Now this is how well a tyre rolls. Now if a tyre is designed in a way that minimises the amount of resistance that it gains from the rotor, if it is a tyre, for example, that is slick, that is smooth, as opposed to one that has tread on it, that is going to have much better rolling resistance. Because when you're riding along the road, you are going to encounter less in the way of, vibrations, of upset. It's a very difficult concept to explain. I mean, you can probably tell I'm not a physicist. But the amount of resistance that we gain off of the road, how well the tyre rolls along the road, has a real impact on how much sort of power is lost through transfer onto the road. Now, between pushing the pedals down, pushing our legs down, I should say, between our shoes, our pedals, our drivetrain, our wheel, and our tyres, we lose power. Power is lost through that train, and we are looking to reduce the amount of power that is lost. And by having tyres at a correct pressure is really going to help that. We will all have seen people who sort of ride around normally on the pavement, on our city or in our towns, on mountain bike tyres that are visibly very low on air. And they are absolutely going nowhere. This is the opposite of what it is that we're looking for. We are looking for a nice smooth tyre in good contact with the road that is going to help transfer our power really efficiently. In fact, there is actually a website, Bicycle Rolling Resistance. Go and have a look at it. And you can input in there different tyres that they test on their rig, and they'll be able to tell you how many watts it is that you lose from each tyre at various tyre pressures. Okay, it's really interesting. I use it with my athletes. I subscribe to their professional sort of membership, and I use it to help guide athletes on the best tyres to choose to optimise their time. And this is, it's really impactful. So please do not overlook rolling resistance. Between improved rolling resistance, improved puncture protection, and having that improved grip in the corners, getting better tyres is an absolute no-brainer. It doesn't need to break the bank either. Look around, there are normally good offers on tyres. You can get yourself a really premium set of tyres for about £100. Don't get me wrong, it's not pocket change, but it is going to make such a difference to your cycling. I really encourage you to splash the cash here. While we're on the subject of tyres, I wanted to talk about tubeless tyres. And this is something that I broadly consider to be an upgrade. Now, the way that tubeless tyres work, for those of you who aren't aware, is that instead of having an inner tube inside the tyre, you create a vacuum within the tyre, and that holds the bead on. And inside the tyre is tubeless sealant. And the idea is that if something goes through the tyre, if something pierces the tyre, then this sealant rushes through to this gap, and it will start sealing itself. So as you ride along, you may see a little bit of white spray or any other colour depending on the sealant, and that will hopefully only be there for a few seconds until the sealant seals and it fixes that puncture there on the spot. Now this means that you don't need to worry about changing a tyre whenever you get a flat. And for a lot of people, this is a massive upgrade. We go, okay, that is ideal. That is brilliant. Why wouldn't I want to run tubeless? Again, I think they actually have sort of lower rolling resistance. Generally, it's a lighter setup. It sounds like a win-win. And for the most part, it is. However, it is not perfect. Now, for a start, if you are riding along and you get a really big hole in your tyre, then the sealant is not going to be able to seal that. If there is a slash from a piece of glass or something like that, if there is a sizable hole, the sealant isn't going to be able to seal in time. And you will end up being stood there at the side of the road going, what next? Now, of course, this is a big downside to tubeless, But on the other hand, if you have a hole in your tyre that is that big that tubeless cannot seal it, chances are, even if you're running inner tubes, it will still likely be the end of your ride, because the hole in your tyre would be that big that the inner tube would bulge through there, and you're out of luck. So it is not, it's not a perfect solution. However, I think for most people it is an upgrade. But I have had clients who I have suggested, like, look at tubeless tyres. I think they'd be, the way forward for you. They've had an absolute nightmare with them. And one athlete of mine has actually gone back, and you know what? He's absolutely entitled to do that. Entitled to do that. It's absolutely fine. I never sort of try to really push people strongly towards these things, but a lot of people have had a really positive experience with tubeless. Some of it comes down to how the tyre is set up. I mean, I'm not a master at setting up tubeless tyres, if I'm honest. It's something that I still need to get the hang of, but it is, for most people, probably the way forward. I think it really started with mountain bikes, off-road bikes, where they are a lot more likely to get punctures, and the punctures generally tend to be some sort of thorns and the like. So it's a really good solution there. Again, it's not a perfect solution, but there's nothing stopping you from running tubeless and also having a spare inner tube with you, so that if you do end up with a puncture that does not seal, for whatever reason, it could be that the sealant has dried up in the tyre, if there's any reason that you weren't able to, the sealant tyre wasn't able to seal itself, you can whack an inner tube in there and continue with your ride. You just need to make sure that you still carry that pump or that CO2 canister with you to help you get yourself out of trouble. A quick caveat actually on the subject of tubeless tyres is that not all tyres are tubeless compatible. Most tyres these days will be at least tubeless ready, which means that they will allow you to use tubeless with them. But it's not every single tyre. So do just keep this in mind before you go out and buy yourself a tubeless kit. Maybe head down the bike shop, even if you just take the wheel in and go, hey, can I run these tyres tubeless? And they should be able to help you out there. You can use video tutorials online to help you install tubeless tyres, but for that first time, you may want to get a mechanic to do it. Bike mechanics, they're not as expensive as car mechanics, not more affordable. It may save you a lot of frustration until you understand the process better. Next upgrade that I'm going to cover is a bike fit. Now, this isn't a component you can buy for your bike. This is a service that you pay for, but getting yourself a good bike fit is worth its weight in gold. It's going to save you so much energy, so much time on the bike, and it's also going to help you run an awful lot better. I cannot recommend bike fits enough, but I am going to talk you through the 3 types of bike fits you can get to help you understand which one is right for you. Now, the first type of bike fit you can get is when you buy a bike and you go into the shop. Here's your bike, we built it up for you. Now what we're going to do is we're going to stick it on a turbo trainer, and we're going to set your saddle height, we're going to set your saddle fore aft, we're going to make sure that the reach is right on the bike, and we're going to get you in a decent position. And this will normally take about between 10 to 20 minutes for the most part. It is a service because they want to make sure that when you ride that bike out their door, that you are happy, that you are reasonably comfortable on it. However, this is not really a bike fit in the truest sense. It's much more of it's just a handover, really. It's making sure the position is roughly right. This is something that is not going to be delivered by trained personnel. This is going to be shop assistants that are just kind of eyeballing it to make sure that you are on the right track with your position, that you are going to be able to ride that for short periods without any kind of issues. The issue is that cycling is a sport where a millimetre here or there can make the difference between a really comfortable ride or a ride where you encounter pain. And as a result, especially if you are taking on longer triathlons, you need to get a proper bike fit. Now, this involves going to either, a lot of bike shops will go out there, have a bike fitting studio, and you go upstairs. And you can normally spend 2 or 3 hours with this bike fitter. and they will look at your mobility, they'll look at your flexibility, they will get you on a fitting jig, and they will help you sort of understand sort of where it is that you want to be on the bike, and they'll then get your bike, and then they'll then try to adjust your bike to mirror what they've created on the jig. They'll be suggesting new parts, they will be looking at your shoes, suggesting different sort of shims and supports and insoles for that shoe, different kinds of handlebar, different saddles. They can do pressure mapping where you sit on the saddle and it is able to sort of work out where the pressure is on that saddle, and they can then adjust the position to help get that right. This is a premium service, and these days I think you're going to be looking at £250-300, sometimes more, for this kind of service. But if you are spending thousands on a bike, the least you can do is get somebody to get you comfortable on it. Okay, it is an absolute no-brainer in my mind. Like, you are doing yourself a disservice if you're racing triathlon at, what I call like a reasonable level. If you want to get faster, you're investing in your training, you are buying all of these other upgrades for your bike. If you do not get a bike fit, you're doing yourself a disservice. It's an absolute no-brainer to at least get this level of bike fit. Now, the final level of bike fit is what I would call a performance bike fit. And depending on the fitter that you go to, it may not end up being a huge amount more than the sort of your regular bike fit. But it is a bike fit that is delivered with triathlon in mind, with aerodynamics in mind, with the run in mind. And it is just taking things to that level of performance, wanting to get the best, most aerodynamic, most efficient position that you can be. Because most bike fitters, when you go to see them, those who focus on road bike, it's all about getting you comfortable. And in fact, a very good fitter that I used to work with, he would say how he very rarely looked at anything to do with aerodynamics in his bike fitting studio. For him, it was all about comfort. But there are some people out there for whom they want more than comfort, especially triathletes, to go, hang on, well, I want to be aerodynamic, I want to be faster. Now, a lot of bike fitters don't understand this aerodynamic aspect to it. They haven't got the understanding, they haven't got the eye, they haven't got the experience to be able to recommend how you can get into the best position that you can be. Now, there are some very well-known bike fitters out there. I'm not going to name drops, it would be unfair on those that I failed to list, but bike fitters out there who you can go and you can spend sort of a whole morning with for £500, sometimes more, to try and get you in the absolute ideal position on your bike. They have all sort of the kit out there that you could expect. They will have all sorts of helmets that you can try. It really is, a premium experience, and it's designed for somebody who spent 10 grand on a bike and is happy to spend another 500 quid on it to get themselves really comfortable and really aerodynamic. Again, this is money well spent. When you look at the costs involved with racing at Ironman 70.3 and Ironman level, this is it's a bit of a no-brainer, especially if you're looking to go down a performance pathway, because there's nothing worse than seeing somebody who's clearly got the latest triathlon bike, really expensive bike, you recognise it, and they're in just sort of like a bolt upright position that doesn't look comfortable because, They had the money to splash on the bike, but they were too cheap to pay someone to pay them to get that in a reasonable position. So, I mean, of course, there's always the possibility that somebody could have mobility issues and that stops them from getting into the optimal position. However, you really do want to work with a bike fitter. If you are serious about triathlon, getting yourself a really performance-focused bike fit is money really well spent. Next up, we have clip-on aero bars. Now, buying a time trial bike is expensive. You are looking at about £4,000 minimum these days if you want to get a time trial bike, for the triathlon bike for the most part. Difference between a time trial bike and a triathlon bike, for those who are interested, is a time trial bike is UCI compliant. which means that it has to fit all of the rules for cycling's governing body, whereas a triathlon bike doesn't need to adhere by these rules, and they're generally set up a bit more for being able to run well off them as opposed to being for just going as fast as possible. Some professional triathletes, they'll ride full triathlon bikes. Some will go for full time trial bikes. There's no right or wrong answer, but I just thought I'd clear that up there. But yeah, either way you go, time trial or triathlon bike, it's a big investment. And the main thing that we're looking to achieve when we're looking for these time trial bikes is to get ourselves into an aerodynamic position. So instead of riding along, holding onto the handlebars, we are lying with our arms on armrests, holding onto these ski bars in front of us, and giving us a very aerodynamic position that cuts through the air much more easily, much smoother than being stood upright on the hoods, sat upright on the hoods, I should say. So it is a no-brainer, and you will add, in most cases, 2, maybe 3 kilometers an hour onto your speed on the flats by getting these bars. Sometimes less, it depends how aggressive you go with the positioning. But it is a no-brainer. It makes such a difference, and this will save you minutes over a triathlon. Again, yeah, over like a sprint and Olympic, the difference is smaller. But once you get to the longer events, I mean, you could easily, over an Ironman, you could end up saving 10 minutes by having some aero bars on. So if you're just taking on your first event, it's not the end of the world. But if you are looking to get faster, if you want to get closer to 12 hours, 11 hours, 10 hours, getting yourself in this aerodynamic stretched out position is of critical importance. And you can get some clip-on aero bars for about £30-40 that bolt onto your handlebars and allow you to get into that position on a road bike. And this is probably the best value upgrade. If you're looking at the amount of money that you invest for the speed that you gain, getting clip-on aero bars is an absolute no-brainer. No-brainer. What you need to make sure that you're doing with these clip-on aero bars is you need to make sure, first of all, that your handlebars can accept the clip-on aero bars. Now, some handlebars that you get, they are tapered. They're designed to be aerodynamic handlebars, and rather than being shaped circular, they'll be shaped more like a teardrop. And the idea is that this helps the air flow over the handlebars better. It's a marginal gain, but it's, for people who are racing on the road where aero bars are banned, then these things, it could help you win a race in a sprint or in a solo breakaway. But in triathlon, these don't really make that much of a difference, and it's much better to have the ability to have some clip-on aero bars than to have these tapered handlebars. Now, you can get you could trade out your expensive aerodynamic handlebars for some cheaper rounded handlebars that would allow you to have the clip-on aero bars, but this has gone from a £30-40 investment up to closer to to £100, I imagine, £80 to £100 in most cases, depending on the handlebars. You're having to switch out the cables and the gears and the handlebar tape and all of this. It becomes a bit of a mission. Now, some manufacturers of tapered handlebars, they will have specific clip-on aero bars to use with those tapered bars. Not many, but some of them do. So do have a bit of a look, do have a bit of a Google before you find yourself despairing a little bit, because the bike that you bought because it was aerodynamic can't actually take an aerodynamic upgrade. Now, with the clip-on aero bars, getting them fitted, getting them to be comfortable, it does take a little bit of trial and error. Because you've got to think about the height, you've got to think about how far apart they are, you've got to think about the angle of them. And when you're attaching them, you do need to use a torque wrench, because if you loosen those, if you don't tighten them enough and they are too loose, those handlebars, then as you're riding along, you do run the risk of the clip-on aero bar suddenly failing on you and you having a crash as you fly over your front wheel. We can't afford for that to happen. That is not an option. So we get a torque wrench that measures the amount of force that we are applying. So you look at the bars and they go, these need to be a minimum of 10 Newton meters. That's just a number I pulled out of the air there. And you can set your torque wrench to 10 Newton meters so that you tighten that up and that is going to be exactly where you need those bars to be. It's a safety thing, and it's really important. But once you got those installed, it does take some time to get used to them. Build yourself up very slowly with your confidence. But if you can get confident on clip-on aero bars, it's going to make an enormous difference to your speed on race day. It really is going to. So I do recommend these. Now, some people may go, well, why do I need a triathlon bike? And of course, I do touch on this in the episode that I signposted you to earlier. But the main downside is that you can't access your gears with clip-on aero bars unless you go to the level where you are going to you're going to stick some gear shifters on the end of your aero bars. Buy some shifters for aero bars, stick them on the end of your clip-on aero bars, and wire your cables through there. You can do that. There's nothing stopping you. But you then of course can't change your gear from the hood's position. And it's very difficult to get yourself in a position where you are comfortable both sat on the hoods and in the aero position, because when you're sat in the aero position you need to move your saddle a little bit further forwards for comfort, and also to help sort of with the hip angle to make running off the bike a little bit easier. You want, in most cases, if not every case, shift the saddle a little bit forward, and that does cause some issues, because if you then go back to your position the hoods, the saddle's going to be further forward than you want it to be. In fact, I mentioned the bike fitter that I used to work with. I remember he came down once. I said he used to work in a bike shop. He came down to me once. He said, I've just managed to get somebody comfortable on clip-on aero bars and in the hood's position for the first time ever. Like, all of the years that I've been doing it, I've never been able to balance them perfectly. But, due to the rider, due to the bike, due to the setup, I've just managed it for the first time. So there is always, well, nearly always, unless you're this chap in question, nearly always a real sense of compromise between these. And that's why I recommend that serious triathletes have two bikes. They've got a road bike that they can ride around in a comfortable position, group rides, bad weather and the like, and they have their time trial bike, their triathlon bike, where they are nailed into that position. If you are getting yourself clip-on aero bars, you're probably also going to want to look at getting yourself a triathlon saddle, because this will be significantly more comfortable for riding in the aero position for prolonged periods as opposed to a regular road saddle. Now, these aren't super cheap, and you may look at them and essentially you're sat on two prongs and you go, how on earth is that going to be comfortable? But trust me, there's a reason that they're made like that, is because actually that is the most comfortable way to ride that bike in the aero position. You definitely want to have a look at these. Now, if you are looking at thinking, oh, I want to get a bike fit, okay, make sure that when you go in for the bike fit that you have this, at the very least, the clip-on aero bars. The triathlon saddle, they will hopefully be able to recommend you a triathlon saddle when you're getting the fitting. Hopefully they have one in stock that they can stick on the bike and you can practice sort of riding with and see if that's one for you. Obviously you'll be charged for that saddle if you go for it. Should go without saying really, but you do have the option when you pop into a bike fitter to mix and match these things, but don't turn it to a bike fit without clip-on aero bars saying that you want to use clip-on aero bars, because that's not the way to go about it. And another note on bike fitting, actually, if you haven't got a bike yet, I highly recommend you go for a fit before you buy the bike, so that they can help ensure that you buy a bike that fits you, because there is no worse feeling for a bike fitter than somebody rolls in their pride and joy. They just splurge their savings on. They get them on the bike, start fiddling around with things, and they just have to look at the client and go, "I'm sorry, mate, you've bought the wrong bike. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to get you comfortable on this." Like, nobody wants to be able to say that. So, if you can book yourself in with a bike fitter before you buy the bike, especially if it's from the same shop. If they have an in-house bike fitter, then you go in, you can collect the bike, and they will have it all set up to your measurements for you ready to ride away. Everybody wins. Next up, we have a power meter. Now, for the long distance triathlete, this is probably the best upgrade you can get. This is probably going to provide the greatest return on investment. Now, I'm going to start right at the bottom here for those who've never heard of cycling power before, so apologies if you're up to speed on this. But cycling power is an objective measurement of cycling performance, which is made by measuring the torque, so the amount of force that you put through the pedal, as well as how fast you're pedaling. The higher your cycling power, the faster you'll be going, broadly speaking. And this is useful for pacing yourself in a race as well as training, because you can discover your threshold power by doing a fitness test, and you can use that threshold power to set you training targets and race targets as well. For triathletes, this is super important, because if we know if you have, say, an FTP of 250 watts, that's your threshold. You may say, well, over my Ironman, I want to race at about 185 based on that. Then by having a power meter on your bike, it means that you will not be pushing yourself too hard, and you're not going to burn yourself out ahead of the run. Equally, it stops you from going too easy, too slowly. It really helps ensure that you are nailed into this into this target that is exactly the kind of intensity that you want to be at. Now, power meters are not the cheapest upgrade, but you can get them for about £350 these days. So they, again, they're an investment, but it's not like they were when I started cycling, where they were for just the few who could afford them. They have become a lot more affordable. I recommend looking at this is a rare plug from me. I recommend looking at the Favero Asioma power meter. Most other brands, when I worked in the bike shop, we'd have really well-known brands who people thought they could trust, and their power meter pedals, they just weren't up to scratch. They kept getting water inside the battery housing and ending up with erratic readings from the power meter. The manufacturer in question, they tried to fix it, but they never quite got round to it. And one of the downsides was that they used little coin cell batteries in the axle of the power meter, pedal-based power meter, whereas the Favero Asioma, it uses USB recharging technology, so you don't have to worry about swapping out batteries. The batteries don't last quite as long, but you can still get a good few months out of them before you need to recharge in most cases. So that is sort of my recommendation. I do believe in pedal-based power meters as opposed to one that is built into the crank arm or the spider. The reason being that it's easy to swap between bikes. Okay, I have a road bike, I have a triathlon bike, and I have a gravel bike, and I can swap my power meter pedals between these, so I have only bought one power meter instead of having to buy three. If you don't want to do this, if you'd rather just buy a power meter that sits on the bike all the time, that's absolutely fine. If you don't want to have to faff around with pedal wrenches and Allen keys and getting the pedals zeroed out every time, that's fair enough. If you've got the money, that's absolutely fine. But again, what you want to avoid is if you have a power meter built into the crank arm and you go to a bike fitter and they go, oh yeah, I think we need to put you on some shorter cranks here, you would have to buy a new power meter. It's very expensive. So I do recommend just for the flexibility aspect, you do go for a pedal-based power meter, and I do recommend the Faveros. Unlike most of the other upgrades here that I've listed, it's not going to make you go faster in itself. You could whack a power meter on the bike and go absolutely no faster whatsoever. But if you learn to use it, if you work with a coach such as myself, or just do your own research, your own reading, and you start to understand how to really use cycling power to help you become a faster cyclist, then the gains to your fitness are going to be enormous. Sorry, that's my dog falling off the bed. What are you doing? So I record my podcast in my bedroom because of all the soft furnishings, and she likes to join me because obviously she wants to have some company, doesn't she? Yes. Right, what was I talking about? I was talking about power meters. So yeah, power meter is some of the best money that you can spend. And now, even if you can't afford to get one on your bike, if you get a turbo trainer that has a power meter built in, this will still allow you to be able to train effectively. But it is really useful to be able to take those power numbers out onto the road with you, because that is going to help you pace yourself really well on the day. And again, the main reason that triathletes use power meters is to stop themselves from pushing too hard and burning themselves out for the run. I'm going to look at cassettes and chain rings now. Now, a cycling cassette is the series of cogs that you have on your rear wheel. that you can change gear through easily, and your chain rings are at the front. And you will, in most cases, have two chain rings. Very occasionally, you might only have one, or you might have three. I haven't seen a triple around for some time now, actually, but broadly speaking, most triathletes will run a double system. Now, if you have a hilly course that you're taking on, you are going to want to think very carefully about the cassette that you have on your bike, because the larger the number of gears that you have on your largest cog on your cassette, the easier it will be to ride up hills. Now, in days gone by, cyclists, I think going back sort of the 70s, the most gears that they would have, sorry, the most teeth that they would have on their biggest cassette ring would be 25. And the reason for that was, well, that's what you use on a hilly stage. You don't need anything more than that. Whereas I think due to sort of people being a bit more open-minded, as well as advances in technology, we now routinely on bikes go up to a 34 tooth ring on road bikes. Now, if you have a 34 tooth ring, that is going to make it a lot easier to go up hills. When I did Ironman Bolton, I was an idiot, I have to say. I should have known better, but I just moved house when I took on the Ironman, so I had other things on my mind. But I should have got myself a 32, if not a 34 cassette, because that would have made my life so much easier on the steep hills. As things were, I had a standard crank set, which makes life a bit harder for me anyway. It's great. It's useful on the flats, but on a hilly course, especially for someone like me who's a lighter athlete, I should have switched to a compact and had myself 34 rings on the back. That would have probably saved me a good sort of 15-20 minutes over the bike course, and I would have had quite a different race. It really is worth investing in getting yourself, because I say investing, they're not that expensive unless you go for sort of Dura Ace or a Super Record or something like that. If you go for a really premium group set, then the cassettes will be more expensive. But for the most part, you can be looking at sort of £30-40 for a new cassette. You just need to make sure that it is the same manufacturer. So if you've got yourself a Shimano group set, it doesn't matter if it is a Tiagra or a 105 or an Ultegra cassette that you get. Again, the more expensive they will be, the lighter they will be. There might be some marginal improvements in shifting performance. But as long as it comes from the same manufacturer and it has the same number of gears. So if you have a 10-speed bike with 10 gears, don't buy yourself an 11-speed cassette. That will not work. The indexing will not line up. You will have an absolute nightmare, and it will frustrate the hell out of you. But yeah, as long as you get a cassette that's compatible with your bike, ask your bike shop if you're in doubt. Then you are going to make your life a lot easier on the hills. Now, the downside to going for a wider cassette, so broadly speaking, these days, nearly every cassette has 11 teeth on the smallest cog. Now, if you have, say, an 1123, should we say? I think those are still out there. That is an incredibly narrow cassette that someone might use if they were taking on a sort of a completely fat time trial. Because they're not going to need a gear that is easier than 23. Because they're on the flats. And the benefit to having this narrow cassette is every time they change gear, it's a very incremental change. So if they're on a pretty flat course, but there's still the gradient just kicks up by 1.5-2%, they can change a gear and they can just drop their cadence from 95, say, to 93, and they'll feel comfortable. Think that's a bit better. That's more where I want it to be. Or go the other way. You can really fine-tune your cadence and your effort. Whereas if you have a cassette that is, like I've said, sort of an 1134, then every time that you change gear, it's going to be a bigger jump. So you may change gear, and you may go from 95 to 87 in one jump. This when you change your gear, depending on the terrain, depending on lots of other factors. That is an extreme example, but they've got these bigger jumps, and it can be difficult to find yourself in that comfortable position where you're a comfortable cadence where you're like, yeah, like this feels really good. You can be like, well, this gear feels a bit too hard. My cadence is really low. And I'll drop down a gear. Now I'm pedaling too fast. Now, luckily, in most parts of the world, the terrain is gently undulating enough that you'll never be in that holding that exact cadence for that long. It's not like we're riding on a track where it's going to be absolutely sort of pan flat. We are riding on the road. There are going to be these little undulations. Although, I imagine there are some areas, especially of the States, where it can be a lot flatter out there, where this could become more of an issue. But if you are taking on a hillier triathlon, absolutely look at getting yourself a larger cassette, a wider cassette. Bear in mind, if you do this, that you are probably going to need to upgrade your rear derailleur as well, your rear neck. To be able to take that larger cassette. And this is something that is worth chatting to your bike shop or online retailer about when you're buying these parts to make sure that everything is going to be compatible. The next thing I'm going to look at is aerodynamic water storage solutions. Now, if you want to be aerodynamic over a triathlon, if you want to be as fast as you can be, then you need to think carefully about where it is that you store your water bottles. It may seem obvious to store them on your bike normally on the down tube and the seat tube, but this creates a not insignificant amount of drag. It can cost you sort of several watts of power. So you've got three main options. The first is if you have a bike that has internal storage. So some of them will have a bladder, and you fill that bladder up with water that will keep you, hydrated while you're riding. And if it's tucked away inside the bike frame, then there's absolutely zero drag associated with that. If you are using a bladder, I'd recommend only filling it with water for your training and only using carb mix during your races, because the difficulty of cleaning the bladder out to make sure that you keep it nice and sterile, that's not a job that you want to do that often, but for race day it's worth it. But yeah, that is the ideal solution, but it's very rare that you do a race where you can get by purely on the bladder alone. So you can either store bottles in front of you, so around sort of between your aero bars. The fashionable way to store them at the moment is to keep them between somebody's chest and the aero bars, really. So you're almost sort of lying over them as you ride. But you can also, if you want to, have it slightly further forward between the aero bars. Now, the downside to keeping the bottles here is that because you have to take an arm off of the aero bars to be able to have a drink, and it does take time and practice to get used to be able to take your arm off of the aero bars, remove the bottle from the holder, be able to drink and replace it whilst riding the bike. If you are new to triathlon, don't worry about this. Just stick your water bottle wherever it's the most comfortable, okay? Don't worry yourself overly about this. But if you're listening to this podcast because you want to get faster, if you want to know the best place to spend your money, then having these water bottles at the front of your bike is a really good way. Yes, I'm sorry, Poppy. I'm sorry not giving you enough attention. Don't know what it is that's wrong with her today. Then you want to make sure that you put your if you're optimizing aerodynamics, this is a really easy win. Now, if you can't have your bottle at the front for whatever reason, if you're not used to it, not comfortable with it, you can put bottles to the rear of the bike as well. You can either have one or two bottles. Now, if you are looking to to go down this road, which I think it's a good idea. I mean, if you are taking on, say, a full distance Ironman and you don't like the water, the electrolytes, all of the gear they're giving out on the course, the carb mix, then you want to ensure that you have enough water with you to get by, and that by having, taking sort of 3 or 4 bottles with you, it's a good way to at least get yourself started. So you can put 2 bottles behind you. Now, if you go down this route, make sure that you get really good bottle cages. Hang on, I'm going to need to get some fuss, aren't I? So we've been out for a WALK and we are ready to continue. I normally record the podcast later in the day, recorded it in the morning, and yes, sometimes it puts her out of her routine. So Yeah, if you're looking to get a rear-mounted hydration system, the biggest issue that you have is bottles launching themselves. So you want to get some good quality bottle cages for the rear cages. Now, you are going to be looking probably at the X-Lab Gorilla. Really is the one that I recommend. It's the only bottle cage that I hear people regularly come back to me and say, look, it worked amazing. A lot of the other brands, other cages, if you hit a pothole, if you go over some rough terrain, it will jettison your bottle out onto the middle of the bike course, which not only means that you lose your nutrition, it also means that you could end up causing a crash. So I really do recommend investing in some of these good quality cages. You can also get, if you look at different options out there for mounting these bottles onto the rear of the bike behind the saddle. You can also find attachments for being able to store different kinds of tools, saddlebags, all in a nice aerodynamic package. It does get expensive. These are it's a bit of a cottage industry. You're paying high prices, for these custom bits of carbon fibre and kit. So it can get pricey. Again, you can try to do it on a budget, but if you are trying to do it on the cheap, just try to make sure that you spend a bit on the bottle cages themselves, even if the sort of the mounts themselves, you do go for a slightly cheaper option. The next bit of bike kit you can look at is an aerodynamic helmet. Now, this is something that is just really is free speed. You will go faster with one of these helmets. Depending on the ventilation levels, however, if you do go for a full aerodynamic helmet rather than a road aero helmet, these can be very limited in ventilation, and especially if you go into a hot race, you'd be better off taking a helmet that has more ventilation, that is less aerodynamic, that will stop you from overheating quite so badly. This is a real genuine concern, and I'd really hate to see people sort of fail to finish races because they chose the wrong helmet. So between the road aero helmets, which are cheaper and less aerodynamic, or your full aero helmet, we all have to make the decision on how much we're willing to sacrifice ventilation for performance, and in some case aesthetics. The full road aero helmet, the full aero helmets. They are an interesting look. They often come with a visor. They're often this really bulbous shape, and the actual benefits over a road aero helmet, they're not as large as you might think. They are often double the price as well. But if you are trying to find every single saving, if the extra 2 watts that you'd save for getting that road aero helmet could be the difference between you achieving your time goal or your qualification goal, then this is sort of money well spent. Also worth considering the profile of the course as well. If it's a really hilly course, then aerodynamics are going to be less impactful, and you might be better off going for a road aero helmet. Whereas if it is a very flat course, then going for that full road aero helmet will really help you there. So go and sort of try these on. Different helmets are suited to different head shapes. But getting yourself a good, more aerodynamic helmet is money really well spent. But even if you are not interested in aerodynamics, even if you just want to get round your first race, going for a slightly higher end helmet that is lighter, that is more ventilated, that isn't going to feel like you're wearing it, it can be a real, a real game changer. Next up on my list of upgrades is electronic shifting. So this is going from a mechanical group set, which is shifted via you sort of pressing buttons forcefully, paddles and that to change your gear, to just sort of clicking electric buttons, which will shift the gears for you. There are several advantages to this, and I do consider it to be an upgrade. Now, the first of which is that you don't have to worry about cables, about indexing gears nearly so much. When you have a cable that runs all the way from your shifter down to the derailleur itself, then over the time, as you ride, as you sort of hit different bumps, people talk about cable stretching, but I don't know if cables really stretch, to be honest, if you look at the materials they're made of. But anyway, let's not go down that rabbit hole. You will, over time, need to re-index your gears, need to retune them to make sure they are still shifting perfectly. With electronic shifting, it is fit and forget. You don't need to worry about having to tweak your gears if one starts skipping or making a bit of a noise. Once you set them up, or get a mechanic to set them up for you, would be my recommendation. They should never miss a beat. Now, you do need to remember to charge your gears, but again, the battery life on these is weeks, if not months long. Get yourself into a habit, first day of every month, put your gears on charge and you won't really have to worry about it. You do have different types of electronic shifting. So you have the shifting that's the line of the sort of wireless shifting, which SRAM use. So that is you have your receivers that are on different components, so your gear shifters mainly, and you then have these sort of little blips which you can place anywhere on your bike. So you can have shifters if you're taking a triathlon bike, for instance. You can have shifters on your on the bar extensions where your hands are going to be for most of the race. You can have shifters on the bull horns where you'll have access to the brakes, so that as you're riding up a hill, you can change gears without having to reach around to the bar end extensions. And you can also have gear shifters sort of just hidden on the base bar as well. If you tend to sort of climb in that position there, want to sort of sit upright, you can put shifters wherever you want. You could even put them on your down tube if you're feeling a bit old fashioned. This is really great because it gives you a huge amount of flexibility. The other option is wired electronic shifting, such as what Shimano currently uses, I believe, unless they've released something in the last year or so that has updated that, but I'm pretty sure that it all has to go through a junction box, which you have to install into your bike somewhere, or tucked away, and it's all handled from there, and wires have to be run from your shifter through into that junction box. And it's definitely a bit of a faff, to say the least. I mean, obviously, if you're paying a mechanic to do it, if you're not the one setting it up, it's not the end of the world, but I know a lot of people have encountered a lot of frustration with these. But yeah, electronic shifting, another benefit apart from sort of the indexing, is that it requires less energy. Now, this is something that it's really easy to laugh at. You could be sitting along, you could be driving, or walking around, listening to this podcast and thinking, what a ridiculous thing to say, Simon. But I know an athlete of mine who's done ultra endurance events. He says, honestly, like 48 hours into a ride, the idea of having to shift into your big ring to find the strength in your hand to make that shift, just being able to touch a button rather than having to use that is impactful. Now, as triathletes, you don't generally do 48-hour rides. But when you get towards the end of an Ironman bike, for example, if you can just press a button and change into your big ring, rather than having to, to sort of really engage your hand, especially if your hand is cold or wet, there's just something to be said for this. It's also sort of lighter to use an electronic shifting set, because you don't have the cables. Actually, to be honest, the batteries might offset that. Any difference is going to be marginal, really, but the difference really is very small with electronic shifting versus mechanical shifting weight-wise, but the reliability of it's pretty hard to beat. So I would recommend, if you have some money, looking at this, but if you go to upgrade to an electronic group set, that is quite an expensive upgrade to make. And for a lot of people, they might be better off waiting to get a new bike, because if you're looking at how much it could cost to get an electronic group set, you could be looking at, $1.5, $2,000, maybe more. Relative to a new bike that has electronic shifting on it, mainly come in at sort of $5,000 or $6,000. Again, just putting numbers out of the air there, don't quote me on that. But when group sets, they are a lot cheaper if they come with a whole bike, and again, get onto that in a minute. Because one group set that everyone can look at is a whole new group set. Now, a group set, for those who don't know, it covers, broadly speaking, your bottom bracket, your chain rings, your cranks, your chain, your cassette, your shifters, broadly all of the kind of mechanical moving bits on a bike, generally speaking, will come under a group set. And the difference between a really cheap group set and a top group set is one of the things that really sort of money goes on. when you're looking at bikes, because if you get a very cheap one which only has sort of six, maybe seven gears, and it's all very heavy and clunky, and it takes the gear shifts can take sort of quite some time, they wear out quite quickly, relative to something that's much more lightweight, more gears available to you, more instant shifting. This really does make a difference. However, for triathlon, the group set doesn't make nearly as big a difference as it does for cycling. Because cycling, a lot of athletes will be looking to save every gram they can. Because they could be racing, especially if they're looking to take on like a hill climb, or if they're taking on a race that has a sort of mountaintop finish, they'll be looking to cut down on weight anywhere possible. As triathletes, generally speaking, not only are the courses sort of less hilly, and that's a huge generalisation, but generally speaking, the course is less hilly, you don't have to react to the attacks and the surges of other riders. If you are riding in a road race and somebody attacks, you want to be able to know that you can change up a couple of gears and respond to that instantly. You don't want to have to press your gear shift and wait half a second for it to engage, because that could be all the time it takes for that person to disappear up the road and away from you. So having that instantaneous sort of element to it does matter. Also, in triathlon, races are not won or lost on the hills on the bike. They are won and lost on the run. So you could have the lightest bike possible, but because trying to eke out 5 seconds on the person behind you to try to win the Tour de France isn't your objective, then having the lightest weight group set that reacts the fastest, it doesn't matter nearly as much. And of all the areas that I'd encourage triathletes to look at spending money, group set is quite far down the list. Not saying don't bother, especially if you can go from say like a 9-speed to a 12-speed, that will have a real difference. But if you don't have the other things in place first, then you don't want to be looking at sort of taking out a second mortgage to get yourself a nice group set. Again, it's definitely a nice to have. I would always take the nicest group set that I could afford. But the difference between, a really cheap and a good group set. So if I use the Shimano range, because that's the one that I'm most familiar with and most people will be familiar with. If we look at the difference between Sora and Claris on 105, that's an enormous jump. Okay, definitely go for the 105. It's worth spending the extra on a new bike to get 105. The difference between 105 and Ultegra is really small. It is a few grams here and there. 105 is now electric, so there's no longer the benefit with that. And the difference between Ultegra and Dura-Ace, again, is minimal. These really are, for people with more money than sense, who, they will just buy the new group set, the new bike, whenever it comes out, and they want to have Dura-Ace because that's the kind of person that they are. And, fair enough, that's up for them. They are the ones who are, plunging money into the bike industry. I'm not going to deter them from doing that. But you, as a triathlete, you don't need to worry about having the absolute top-end group set. As long as you have a reasonable group set that's, sort of 11 or 12 speed, that's all you really need to worry about. You also need to be conscious of, if you do upgrade from say like an 8-speed to a 12-speed, if the wheel would still be able to take that many gears. Because if it is a stock wheel that came with a very cheap bike that only has 8 gears on it, then you may not have enough space on that wheel, on the axle of the wheel, to fit a 12-speed cassette on. Again, it may be that you do, it's something you will need to check. But again, this is why often when you are upgrading a group set, it can be cheaper to get not cheaper, it can be more economical to get yourself a whole bike. Because if you have a bike that only came with 8 gears, chances are that it's not really built to last several years, and you can get yourself a new group set, but then there's a chance you might need to get yourself new wheels, and that you then need to get yourself a new headset, and you start throwing good money after bad. So, if you are looking to upgrade a group set, it is worth looking at the big picture and going, okay, well, how much life has this bike really got left in it? How much more expensive is it for me to get a whole bike rather than just a group set? Because sometimes the difference isn't as large as you think. Another upgrade you can look at is larger rotors or higher quality rotors for disc brakes. Now, if you run rim brakes, nothing wrong with that. But you can look at getting yourself some better rim brakes on there. But with any kind of brakes, if they are placed under enough load, you will start to suffer from brake fade. You will start to lose the potency of that. And if you are the kind of person who would ride down a long hill and ride your brakes the whole way down, by the time you get to the bottom, the brakes might not work very well. And that's because the brake rotor is overheated. And this is an absolute pain in the backside. And, it's quite scary. And the way that you can prevent this is by getting higher quality and or larger disc rotors that will dispel the heat quicker and will reduce the chance of you encountering that brake fade. So if you are taking on a hilly race such as Ironman Nice, you're not a confident bike handler, getting yourself some larger disc rotors to prevent the chance of brake fade and keeping yourself safe, I reckon that's a pretty good investment. Another upgrade that someone could look at is higher quality bearings. And now Lee touched on this in an earlier episode on bike maintenance that I did. And if you get yourself some good high quality bearings, they will be smoother, which will give you marginally improved power transfer, less losses, and also they would last for a long time. So they are, it's not the worst place to invest. If you chat to your mechanic, it's not the kind of thing I'd recommend because there are so many standards of bearings. It really is an absolute minefield for your amateur athletes. If you chat to your mechanic and say, look, if I want to sort of future-proof this bike, get the most out of it, would you recommend looking at new bearings? They'll probably be really excited to talk to you about bearings because bike mechanics. But that can be a place if you are looking to sort of to optimize every element of your performance where you might want to look. Next up, we have wheels. Finally, I hear some of you say, we're finally touching on wheels. And yes, wheels are, definitely the most expensive bike upgrade that you can make. If you are looking at getting yourself a high quality set of wheels, you can be looking at several £1,000s. So why is it that wheels are so expensive? Well, in the bike industry, imagine a triangle. Strong, light, and cheap. Okay? You can only pick two of those. So if you want wheels that are strong and light, they're not going to be cheap. If you want wheels that are cheap and light, they're not going to be strong. And you will see lots of people who go, I managed to get these wheels for an absolute steal, absolute bargain from this Chinese carbon fibre factory. And and I saved myself an absolute fortune on those wheels. So okay, so yeah, it could be that you saved yourself, you have saved yourself an absolute fortune there. But when you buy wheels from a reputable manufacturer, they go through high levels of stress testing before they are shipped, because they want to ensure, it's their name on it. They have, a warranty. A warranty that will be honoured, I should point out. But if you take just a random wheel that you ordered off of the internet from a Chinese factory, it may not have undergone any testing. And carbon fibre is a miracle material, but it's far from perfect. And one of the reasons that it's so strong, carbon fibre, is because when bikes and wheels and components come off the assembly line, they will be heavily stress tested to ensure that they are safe to ride on. Whereas if, every manufacturing process is always the chance of defects. If you get these wheels that haven't been tested but that were really cheap, and there is a chance they could fail on you. There is a chance that they could not be as strong. And one type of carbon fibre isn't the same as all of the others. The way that the carbon is laid up, it all is really quite impactful. The direction of the carbon fibre, the type of carbon fibre they use. It is not just, it's like saying something's made out of wood. Okay, is it made out of chipboard or is it made out of oak? Now, it's not quite that bad with carbon fibre, but it is one of those areas where I do encourage people to say, just don't cut corners that put your health and safety at risk. Because if you are going downhill on your very lightweight, very cheap front wheel, that's a tri-spoke wheel, so it's only got 3 spokes on it, and you hit a bit of a pothole and your entire wheel pringles and you go flying over your bars, that's not worth saving money on, if you ask me. Now, there are going to be some people who can ride those wheels forever with no problem at all. And, fair enough. But there are also going to be people, I know people who have bought these cheaper Chinese wheels and they have crashed. And yes, the manufacturer will talk about having this warranty. They'll talk about the quality. But these companies, they're not easy to track down, and then probably not going to honour your warranty. You're probably not going to get a payout if the equipment fails on you. So you are taking a gamble by getting these cheaper wheels. So I would recommend that you go for a sort of more premium manufacturer. Now, I actually run stock wheels on my triathlon bike. I know I'd love to have some higher quality wheels, but I don't have the money really at the moment to be able to invest. I'd rather invest it in the business. I don't really have the money to spend on getting myself some really nice wheels. And not the point in my life. I haven't got a huge performance goal where I'm looking to qualify for anything. I'm just sort of keeping healthy, generally keeping fit, enjoying some racing. I don't have $2,000 to splash on some wheels to help make me marginally faster. But these race wheels that you can get, they will make a difference, just not as big a difference as the marketers and some people would have you believe. Now, there are two types of performance wheels that you can get. You get those that are light and those that are aerodynamic. Now, some aerodynamic wheels will end up being lighter than stock wheels. But generally speaking, you need to choose between whether you're going to chase the weight of the wheel or you're going to chase the aerodynamic profile. Now, for most triathletes, we're going to opt for aerodynamics because we are not riding in a peloton, we are riding solo, or at least we should be. And as a result of this, then we are going to want to optimize aerodynamics. Having a marginally lighter wheel really isn't going to help us an enormous amount. If you look at the overall weight of the bike, and how much it costs to get wheels that are 200 grams lighter, it's pretty hard to justify. Now, these wheels, they do accelerate a little faster. They do feel nicer to ride. But relative to the performance of having a deeper section rim, the aero wheels, they're just going to be so much faster for us as triathletes. So I really do recommend that you start, if you're looking to upgrade wheels, that you look down the route of going for more aerodynamic profiles as opposed to going for a really light wheel. Even if you are taking on something like Ironman Wales or Ironman Leeds, a really hilly course, there is enough flat for the aerodynamic wheels to give you more of an advantage. Looking at aero wheels, the deeper the rim, the greater the advantage, generally speaking. And if you have wheels that have less spokes, these will be lighter, they will be more aerodynamic, but they'll also be more fragile as a result. If you do hit a big pothole, the chances of that wheel sort of pringling are much higher than a stock wheel that may have 32 spokes in it. It's just the nature of the beast. So you want to be careful. You don't want to take these out too much, in bad weather, in rain or anything like that. Definitely not. You do want to get some experience riding them outside so you can get used to handling them in the wind. But you want to make sure that you are sort of picking and choosing when it is that you are using them. But you will sort of have wheels that can start from kind of, like 35, 50 mil into wheels that are close to 80 millimeters or even a full disc wheel on the back. And the deeper the rim, the more aerodynamic the wheel is. Which is, it makes it sound like an absolute no-brainer, right? Well, why wouldn't I go for a disc wheel and a really deep front wheel? Well, the reason that we wouldn't always necessarily jump to that is that there are a handful in crosswinds. Now, some wheels, again, this is where the money goes when you do get yourself some really expensive wheels. Some wheels are designed in a way that minimises this effect because a lot of aero wheels, deep section wheels, if you get hit from a gust by the side, it is going to really sort of throw the bike out of your control for a second. Some wheels are designed to reduce the impact of that, reduce the chances of you getting blown about on the bike. And the handling is also severely compromised, especially when you're going downhill around sharp corners. They just don't turn as well. However, if you are on the flat, if you are going straight, you will notice a definite improvement. However, this improvement, even going from stock wheels to a full disc wheel, we're probably not even talking 5 minutes over a full Ironman. Again, it could be that some courses, some setups, you could be looking at more than 5 minutes, but a lot of people grossly overestimate the speed they can gain from these wheels. And part of that is because they will look at the data and they'll go, oh, well, having these wheels, that saves me 7 watts. And they can put this into best bike split and go, oh, well, 7 watts. Oh, yeah, but that's worth 12 minutes over this Ironman course. That's definitely worth having. But the reality is that this 7 watt figure that's been quoted, again, I'm just putting numbers out of the air here, any numbers that they quote, that you can save you this much, it's all going to be based on wind tunnel testing, really. And we're not riding in a wind tunnel, we're riding outside. And by the time that you take into account sort of crosswinds, headwinds, all of these, it is going to have a real effect. And, hills, cornering and the like, you will go faster with deep section wheels on the vast majority of courses. But the difference is not great enough for you to really sort of put it, on a high interest credit card, because you need to get these wheels ahead of your big race. They will make a difference, but you don't overestimate them. Now, even if we are talking, okay, they can save you 5 minutes over an Ironman. That's a lot of time over an Ironman, let's be honest. But for someone who's just looking to get round, for somebody, when they're measuring their Ironman performance in hours, 12 hours is the best case scenario. I'd be happy with 13, but, 14, I don't care as long as I get the medal. If you're looking at that kind of level, then spending thousands of pounds on these really expensive wheels is probably not the best way to go. And I have to say, as far as aerodynamic upgrades go, wheels do offer the poorest return on investment. For each pound spent, each watt saved, these are right at the bottom of the pile, I'm afraid. So, please, I'm not telling you not telling you not to get these wheels. They will make you faster. And if you have a blank checkbook, go nuts. Go out there, get those wheels. They're sexy, they look good. But if you are somebody who is trying to, look for the most economical places to improve, wheels, they're just not it. You could get a year of my full bespoke coaching for less than a set of wheels, and I can save you hours relative to a few minutes. Now we are down towards the lower end of return on investment. There are lots of companies out there that will offer you things such as titanium skewers, ceramic bearings, oversized pulleys. These are quite expensive, and they offer sort of marginal gains in weight or efficiency. You can even get some really ultra efficient lubricant for your drivetrain as well. You are getting an extremely poor return on investment here. I really would steer you away from these kinds of things. I mean, looking at ceramic bearings as an example, a lot of people use them, but they require quite a bit of maintenance and they don't last nearly as long as your average bearings. So this is something that I really would say, look, if you really are at the pointy end of things, if you really are trying to make sure that you can optimize every single aspect of your performance, sure, get the ceramic bearings, why not? But if you are just looking for, where could I spend a bit of money, again, there are far better places for you to spend your money than on these kinds of sort of very questionable upgrades that aren't really going to provide you with an awful lot of performance at all. And the final upgrade I'm going to cover is a new bike. And the only time that I'd really recommend somebody looks at getting a new bike is if they are looking to buy an upgrade that is going to be so expensive, like a new group set, or if they have to replace numerous components at the same time, it just becomes uneconomical. That is the time to look at a new bike. Otherwise, I mean, I know a lot of people like to make jokes about, if you've got a problem with your bike, it looks like you need to buy a new bike. And I often sort of made on internet forums and the like. realistically, as long as you have a bike that is in good nick, you should only be looking to have to get a new bike every sort of 10 years or so. If you are looking to sort of do a major upgrade, get a bunch of new components, it can be very economical to get a new bike, especially if you can find one in the sale. The best time to buy bikes, for the record, is sort of September, October. The lines for the next year generally drop around sort of November, December time is when they normally start launching. So if you are in early autumn, that is sort of the best time, because they will be trying to get rid of all of their old stock in anticipation of the new stock arriving. But of course, those really popular sizes, 54, 56 centimeter frames, they would have likely sold out before this. So it's a real toss up of sort of the best way, when to wait, when to just bite the bullet. But yeah, generally speaking, early autumn is the best time to buy a bike, but you shouldn't be needing to get one on the regular. The upgrades that you see manufacturers give each year, normally it's just a paint job. It may be the upgrading, to the latest Ultegra rather than last year's Ultegra, but it's very difficult to justify getting that entirely new bike, especially if you're just trying to sort of keep the costs down. There are lots of things you can do, and if your bike does start playing up a little bit, take it for a service. That is the best way to solve the majority of your problems. Have a chat to a mechanic. Even if you have a carbon fibre frame and there is a crack in the frame or an issue with it, get it repaired. Carbon fibre repair is relatively economical. It's not outrageous, and it can save you from having to buy a new frame. It is quite easy to repair carbon fibre if you have, because it's sort of essentially plastic, if you send it to the right place. So that would be my recommendation, is to avoid sort of going down the route of, well, the best upgrade is a new bike, isn't it? Unless you've got money to throw around, be careful with how it is that you invest in bikes. And that is the end of the episode there. It went off a bit longer than expected. But as a conclusion, what you should spend money on, okay, tyres, bike fit, good saddle, power meter, some clip-on aero bars, a wider cassette. Once you start getting towards sort of improved water storage, helmets, electronic shifting, we are moving towards sort of marginal gains. And then by the time that we're looking at wheels, disc brakes, rotors for disc brakes, and the sort of ceramic bearings, these types of upgrades, you really do need to have everything else lined up in your training before you start getting to that point. Thank you very much for joining. I really hope you found that useful. If you did, please take the time to head to wherever you get your podcast and leave me a nice 5-star rating and a nice little review. It really does help spread the word, help more people with their racing. I'm wishing you the very best of luck with your training in the weeks and the months ahead, and I'll see you all next Tuesday morning.